So Happiness, Fear to Faith, a love link story. My life has been filled with terrible misfortune, most of which never happened. Michel Montaigne. Fear is an illusion. Danger is real. A mother's journey from fear to unbounded faith and love. Motherhood has always been my greatest gift and my greatest sorrow. I was baptized in the cauldron of fear when my beautiful daughter found herself in the throes of an opiate addiction. This beautiful young lady was trying to reconcile her grief and find some semblance of peace with painkillers. When her father died in 2007, her grief was palpable. The only way she found solace was to use painkillers to avoid the gut-wrenching feelings of grief. She found herself in a nightmare scenario, homeless and shooting up drugs. She became a mere skeleton of her former self. This beautiful young woman, who had everything going for her, had become trapped in a prison in her own mind. Hanging by a thread, she was barely alive, imprisoned by the drug holding her mind hostage. I knew then that this was a very real danger. She had been dealing with addiction for years, in and out of jail, rehabs, and prison. She had been raped and beaten. Nevertheless, as strong-minded as she is proud that she never stole or sold her body to get her fix. I was desperate. I could not sleep and felt anxious all the time. Every time the doorbell rang, I wondered if it would be the police coming to tell me that she is dead. I had heard about a medicinal plant, ayahuasca, from a highly reputable friend in the medical field. This medicinal vine was shown to have healing properties, and many studies had reported its efficacy for people dealing with depression and addiction. What interested me most about this substance is that, when studied on a functional MRI, the same parts of the brain light up when the subject is in a deep meditative trance or in a theta brainwave state, only much larger and brighter. This area is the part of the brain that, when activated, is primed for programming or deprogramming the subconscious mind. I booked a 3-month retreat in the middle of the Peruvian jungle. The original plan was for me to participate in the ayahuasca ceremonies the first week and then stay in Iquitos while my daughter went through the rest of the program. I went with the intention of getting rid of my own fear regarding losing her to an overdose of drugs. As soon as I decided to go to Peru, the scene was being set. Friends started telling me horror stories about Peru and how unsafe it was for Americans. They felt compelled to share stories about blonde-haired women being robbed, raped, kidnapped, and/or put in the sex trade. Key influencers were planting seeds of fear despite my intention to get rid of my fears, which set me up for even more fear, since whatever you resist persists. People whose opinions I valued, influencers, were planting seeds of fear in my subconscious mind. My husband at the time was freaking out and telling me not to go. Our closest friends were also freaking out and offered to hire a security guard to go with us. Another friend who had experience in Peru made an impassioned plea for me not to leave the airport hotel because Lima, Peru, is a dangerous city for tourists. A frugal woman, I did not take her advice. I had noted that there was a hotel only 3 miles up the road from the airport hotel, and it was half the price, so I booked a room there. My daughter and I landed in Lima so late that by the time we got through customs, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning. We hailed a cab, and I handed the cab driver my TripIt paper, showing where the hotel was, 3 miles straight ahead on the same road as the airport. The cab driver started going a few miles down the road. Then he abruptly took a hard right and headed several miles into a desolate, run-down, secluded part of the city. The buildings were old and decrepit. The windows were all broken. It was like a scene from a gangster movie where the bad guys killed people. This place was deserted, except a stray dog or cat here and there. The driver then pulled up to a concrete culvert, stopped the car, and just sat there. My mind and heart started racing. I took hold of my daughter's hand and told her how sorry I was that I had brought her to a foreign country, and that we might be raped and put into the trunk of the car. Fear, terror, consumed me. I was so convinced that something bad was going to happen. I felt my body trembling. I was getting physically sick with fear. My daughter, on the other hand, was cool as a cucumber and had no worries. After a few minutes, the driver started the car and began driving again. He pulled up in front of what he said was the hotel. However, it looked nothing like the TripIt photos. We got out of the car and started unloading our luggage, and once again I started to panic, screaming to my daughter, "Get back in the car! Get back in the car!" I hollered to the cab driver, "Take us back to the airport! Please take us back to the airport!" Once again, I was overcome with fear. Just then, a gentleman came out and welcomed us to the Indigo Hotel. The hotel itself was beautiful, just like the TripIt photos. The next day, we went back to the airport and took a harrowing, white-knuckle flight into Iquitos. Once again, fear consumed me. The director of the retreat was not there to pick us up, as promised. We had no phone service or Wi-Fi. We waited for an hour, not knowing what to do next. Keep in mind that neither of us spoke Spanish and everyone else had left the airport. Fortunately, a young man named Jesus, not Jesus, as I was politely corrected, came to our rescue. He spoke some English and helped us find the director of the retreat. Within a few minutes of our arrival, the director of the retreat stated, "You might want to give me your money and passports to put in the safe as we've been having a lot of problems with theft." His words set the stage once again for fear to take root in my mind. My daughter and I had several days during our stay at the retreat to enjoy the beauty of the Amazon jungle when she started experiencing pain in her abdomen. When the time came for the ayahuasca ceremony, she decided to sit it out and be an observer. However, I had the opportunity to participate in the ritual. The setting for the ceremony was in a large maloca, an ancestral shack or longhouse, with 12 people. The sun had set, and the shaman was singing Icaros, a chant, and served the medicine to the participants. I drank my portion. Then after 20 minutes or so, I started vomiting profusely and had to make multiple trips to the bathroom. I did not have any hallucinations or great epiphanies. I was, however, so weak from all the purging, I could not summon the energy to walk back to the sleeping quarters after the ceremony ended. So I stayed out in the maloca, which was about 400 yards away from the main sleeping quarters. As I was drifting off to sleep, the door of the maloca slammed open and a big burly man came in and hovered over me, pointing a flashlight on my face. Fear once again engulfed me. In my mind, I thought for sure that this man was going to rob me or rape me. I started trembling and kept asking the guy, "What do you want? What do you want?" He stood there staring at me. Then he just left without saying a word. I then fell into a deep sleep for a few hours. When I awoke, I was pleasantly surprised at how incredible I felt. My daughter, on the other hand, was feeling worse. Her pain was out of control. At that point, the shaman determined that she and another gentleman, who was also there for drug addiction, and I should do a tobacco cleansing protocol to cleanse our system. My daughter and the other guy started purging right away. I, however, just held on to the substance. I felt extremely nauseous and spent the rest of the day in my room. My daughter was in the room across the hall from me, and I could hear her moaning in pain. She was getting worse. I realized that something was drastically wrong and demanded that we take her to the hospital. I use the term hospital loosely, as it bears no resemblance to our hospitals. It was about an hour away, down a bumpy dirt road. I was still feeling extremely nauseous from the tobacco I ingested earlier in the day. As luck would have it, I started purging on the trip. It was a miserable ride for everyone. When we finally arrived at the hospital, my daughter was examined. She was told that she had appendicitis and that she would need to have surgery in the morning. The place was disgustingly filthy. We, as Americans, could not possibly handle the germs that were likely in this place. Furthermore, who knew what kind of education the doctors had? Fear set in once again. I was panicking as I attempted to sleep on the dirty floor next to her bed. Unfortunately, sleep was elusive, as my fear was becoming more palpable due to all the worst-case scenarios that raced through my mind. When the doctor came in the morning, he reported that she did not have appendicitis, but that she had a kidney stone instead. We were relieved and both of us felt like she had just dodged a bullet. Our hearts were filled with gratitude. We spent 2 days in an air-conditioned hotel to allow her some time to recover before we returned to the retreat. I had offered to hypnotize 2 people to help them process their ayahuasca experience. Unfortunately, while I was hypnotizing them, they were being robbed of all their possessions, including their passports. Fortunately, I had held on to ours in my jacket. One woman was there to reconcile with her grief, due to losing her 10-year-old child, had also been robbed of everything. At that point, all she wanted to do was leave the retreat. The director drove her back into Iquitos so she could get help from the American embassy. Once again, I was reeling with fear. That night, the director and his wife did not return to the retreat. Their living quarters were on the 2nd floor of the main center where we stayed. I was awakened by a loud noise outside my window. When I looked out, I noticed that someone with a flashlight was in the director's house, which was right next door. It appeared that he too was being robbed. Everyone was sound asleep. I did not know what to do, so I remained quiet. I did not want to cause a commotion. I was afraid that things could turn violent if I alarmed the other guests. I called the director the next morning to report that his home had been robbed. I assumed that he would return hastily to investigate the situation, but he did not. At this point, I was riddled with fear. I wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. I believed that our physical safety was in jeopardy. Therefore, when the director finally returned, I convinced him to give me back the money that I had prepaid for my daughter to stay there. I did not want to return to the States, as I did not think that my daughter had been there long enough to get the drugs out of her system. So, I booked a flight to Cuzco, Peru, which is close to Machu Picchu. My daughter and I spent a few days of sightseeing and connecting with the Peruvian people, as well as with each other. We thoroughly enjoyed our time together. Then, without warning, I started feeling sick and was not able to eat or keep anything down. I became so sick and weak that my daughter had to call an ambulance to take me to the hospital. I was told at that time that I had an amoeba in my brain and that I could die. Everything went into slow motion as my brain tried to comprehend what was being said. Fear consumed me yet again. I was forced to face my own mortality for the second time in my life. Note: my personal intention for this trip was to get rid of fear, and when I was faced with my own mortality, my thoughts of how my husband and children would handle my death raced through my mind. I recalled all my unfinished business. I did not have a will, and I was in a foreign country. It later struck me that I did not have any fear of what would happen to me after death. With each day that passed, I felt much better and was getting stronger. The doctor was baffled. He stated that there was either a mistake or a miracle. I chose to view it as a miracle. After several days of complete bed rest, I felt strong enough to plan a trip to Machu Picchu. While I was in the hospital, my daughter met a man. She told me that she wanted to have coffee with him and that she would be back at 6 o'clock. I waited for her to return. An hour passed. No K. Another hour passed. No K. 3 hours passed. Still no K. After 4 hours passed without contact from her, I became frantic. I started running through the streets of Cusco, going in and out of every place that was open, showing my daughter's picture to whomever would look. The tears streamed down my face, my body shook, and my lips were quivering. Over and over I screamed out, "Have you seen my daughter? Have you seen my daughter?" In my mind, she was gone. She had been kidnapped, and I would never see her again. I was distraught and felt like my world was ending. I went to the police station, screaming and pleading for them to help me find her. They told me to go back to the hotel room and wait. She finally came back at about 2 o'clock a.m. when she walked through the door. I grabbed her by her hair and held my trembling fist to her face. It took everything I had in me not to hit her. Anger had taken over my fear-based emotions. She looked at me like I was crazy. She told me I needed to get a grip because I was acting like a raging lunatic. She slipped out of my grip, went to the bathroom, brushed her teeth, and crawled into bed as if nothing happened. I tried my best to sleep, but I was far too riled up to sleep. As I lay in that bed seething, my mind started reviewing all the events that had led up to that moment. Each scenario that brought fear into my existence flashed in my mind. I recalled the sleepless nights when anxiety and worry crept in to rob me of peace and joy. I recalled many of the stories that I had conjured up and had allowed to run through my mind over and over. I had myself convinced that all my dreaded fears would come to fruition. Then in the stillness of night, I had a life-altering epiphany. All the fears and worries that I had experienced were all for naught. Yes, there were times of real danger, times that I needed to do something to get myself or my loved ones out of harm's way. What I acknowledged, deep in my soul, was that my worrying never once changed the outcome of any fear-based circumstances in my life. If I were facing a real threat, danger, I would do what I needed to do to alleviate the threat. If there was nothing I could do, there would still be no need to worry because it would not change the outcome. The epiphany was loud and clear. First, I needed to integrate the serenity prayer into every aspect of my life and stay in the garden of authentic faith. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. After a mere 2.5 hours of sleep, my daughter and I went to explore Machu Picchu. It was there that I experienced bliss, a lightness in my spirit and my soul. I felt free. I realized that danger is real and that fear is an illusion. The journey to Peru taught me valuable lessons. My initial intentions for the trip to Peru were to save my daughter and for me to let go of my fear of losing her to addiction. I learned that my intention to let go of my fears only brought more fear into my reality because that was where I focused all my attention. I returned to love. I returned to the garden of authentic faith. I trust that everything is working according to the divine plan for my life. I adopted a this or greater mindset. My newfound faith would be tested 3 months later when my daughter found herself in a life and death situation. She and her drug dealer addicted boyfriend made an impromptu trip to the Bronx in New York, where she and her strung-out boyfriend got into a major argument, and he took a knife to her throat. She jumped out of the car and started running away. He called me later that evening asking if I had heard from her. At that point, I had not. He said that he could not find her but neglected to mention that he had taken a knife to her throat. I inquired about their location and if she had money or clothing. I was concerned because they were in the middle of the Bronx in February. Initially, my mind headed into panic mode, thinking about what could have happened to my daughter, but only for a few seconds. Since I was in Florida and she was in New York, there was absolutely nothing I could do. I immersed myself in the Serenity Prayer and gratefully stepped into the garden of authentic faith. I summoned up my faith and trusted that she would be okay. I slept soundly that night, which was a testament to my faith. My daughter found her way to safety on her own. Sadly, a few days later, the boyfriend was found dead. Note: after sharing my version of the story for this book with my daughter, she shared a LoveLink experience regarding the above story, Kay's LoveLink. When she was in the car driving to New York with the boyfriend, she started feeling strong body sensations and thoughts or vibes telling her, "Don't go, don't go," she said. At that point, there was no way to get out of the situation. When they finally arrived at the destination in NY, that same gut feeling, vibe, or voice in her head kept repeating, "Get out! Get out!" and was even stronger. Within milliseconds, the boyfriend pulled out a knife and aimed it at her throat. She instinctively knew the precise moment to jump out of the car and run for safety. She also stated that she was grateful for the help of strangers that night. Acorn. Your gut feelings, or that little voice in your head, are love links from the divine alerting you to pay attention. As of the making of this app, I am so grateful to report that shortly after this story, my beautiful daughter pulled herself out of the bowels of hell and got herself clean. She is by far the most incredible woman I know. She has created the most beautiful life for herself. Her life is very simple. She wakes up every day grateful for her life. She makes a conscious choice to see the positive. She lives by the Serenity Prayer. She has mastered the art of flipping the script. She gets it that she is the author and creator of her life. She chooses to be present and not let her past define her. She chooses forgiveness. She chooses love. My wish for you, the listener of this video, is that this offers a seed of hope and a forest of faith that healing is indeed possible. If you have a loved one who is struggling with addiction, you may find the videos called River Rocks and Authentic Faith to be very helpful.